Welcome to When Technology Goes Wrong. I'm your host, Paddy Dhanda, and I have the privilege of heading up the product discovery and agile practices here at QA. In every episode, we take a deep dive into a technology failure, figuring out what happened and what we could learn from it. And joining me today is Geoff White, who's an investigative journalist and the author of Rinsed, a new book that dives into the murky world of crypto crime and money laundering. You might also know him as the presenter of the smash hit BBC podcast, The Lazarus Heist, which investigated North Korean hackers. And it was also a book. Welcome to the show, Geoff.
Thanks for having me.
I was tempted to say you're the Walter White of the crypto world, but that would be very wrong of me to say that, because you're definitely on the right side of the law.
Indeed, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So Geoff's here to talk about the incredible story of Helix, the first big dark web cryptocurrency mixer. You've probably loosely heard of the dark net, a kind of loose network of sites that are very hard for authorities to shut down and have become a watering hole for all sorts of criminal activity. There's a lot of buying and selling in this corner of the net, nearly always using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. But criminals always amaze me with their creativity, worried that even Bitcoin wasn't quite safe enough. Someone created a cryptocurrency tumbler to make it even harder for anyone to trace these payments. You think that's weird? Wait until you hear the story of the biggest of these darknet tumbling services called Helix. It's a story of tech, crime, and of course, human error. Geoff, for those who haven't read Rinsed, can you give us a quick overview of the book and why did you decide to take this on?
Yeah, well, the subject of Rinsed is about money laundering and how technology is changing the world of money laundering. As you'll be aware, as your viewers will well be aware, finance has been digitized. We increasingly use cards. I can't remember the last time I used cash. And increasingly people are starting to use cryptocurrencies as well. So this sort of digital innovation wave has rolled over the world of finance. Now, because money laundering is all about finance, it's a financial activity, money laundering has also been digitized. And these kind of new fangled things, the cryptocurrencies of this world, NFTs, all of these kind of things, even faster payments are all being used by money launderers because every tech innovation opens up new space for these money launderers to do their work in.
You mentioned NFTs. Could you just explain what NFTs are? Because I've tried to sort of figure it out and I haven't quite got the concept, if I'm honest.
Yes, NFTs, so this is a non-fungible token. Basically, I think one of the best ways to think about NFTs is through the medium of shares. So if you buy a share in British Airways, for example, you don't get a bit of a plane to take home. So why would you bother doing it? Well, maybe you really like British Airways and you want to invest in them and see them grow. But more likely, you hope that when they grow, they'll become more profitable and your shares will become more profitable. NFTs are a bit like that. So if you're an artist, for example, and you paint a picture, you can effectively sell shares in the picture. People can buy a little bit of the picture. If you become famous as an artist, those shares, those NFTs will probably become more valuable, and so people can buy and sell them. The big difference is shares are regulated. Only British Airways can issue shares in British Airways, and there's a certain number they can issue, and then that's that. With NFTs, anybody can issue a share in anything and anybody can buy them. So it's a very, very open, free sort of a share dealing market, if you like. But you can get burned, you can get caught out. But they became hugely popular a couple of years ago and there's still actually quite a scene around NFTs.
Oh, thank you for that. And what exactly is a crypto mixer and why are they so important for the dark web? And how did you come across Helix?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The dark web is this network of hidden websites. It exists on the internet, but you can only browse these websites using a particular type of software, a particular browser called Tor. And I was doing research into this. This would have been back in 2010, 2012, looking around at these dark websites and trying to get a handle on what they all were, what they all did. As you said, there's a massive amount of criminality on the dark web. So me, as an investigative journalist, I was fascinated by that. But one of the things I noticed was that these sites, it's very difficult to find them. And once you found them, you bookmark them because the chances of you ever finding them again were really rare. Like they're not called ebay.com or Amazon.com. They have long, very peculiar strings of letters and numbers as the domain name. And it ends with .onion. It's not .com, it's .onion. So as you came across a site, it was interesting. You bookmark it and gradually build up these bookmarks because there wasn't a search engine that you could really use. These sites don't particularly want to be found by Google. Google can't index them anyway, and even if it could, the people who run it, they don't want to be on Google. I mean, they're crooks. But there was one search engine, it's called Grams, which allowed you to search the dark web. It was pretty good, and so I was aware of Grams, and I was aware that on Grams there was this service called Helix. Helix gave you the opportunity to mix your currency. You're sending Bitcoin from your Bitcoin wallet to the dark website you're buying from. Well, if the dark website gets attacked by the police or raided by the police or even monitored by law enforcement, they're going to be able to trace the currency back to your wallet. And if they can link that wallet to you, it's handcuffs for you. So the idea of Helix was you could send money in and it would go through a sort of what they call a mixer process. So if I'm buying and you're buying, our money would go into a pool, be mixed together. The idea being anybody can follow the trail into the mixer, but it's a black box and you can't follow the money out of the mixer. And this is hugely popular. I mean, Helix was all over the place. It was one of the most popular sort of mixing services on the dark web. And lots of people used it because they wanted to protect their safety.
It's just incredible how the criminals, like I was saying at the start, they have this sort of creativity and malevolent creativity sometimes to be able to do harm, but in a really creative way.
Yeah.
And Larry Harmon, how did he manage to build Helix into being the go-to mixer for criminals?
Well, Larry Harmon was the man behind Grams, the search engine, the dark web search engine, and he spotted an opportunity to create a crypto mixer. He saw that people wanted to disguise the flow of money. He saw that would be an opportunity, and he created Helix. He created this mixer. He obviously didn't put his name on it, and he didn't put his name on Grams. These were anonymous online services, but the guy behind them was Larry Harmon. And you've got to realize he was making a percentage, I think it was something like 2.5% on every trade that went through that mixer, because obviously he's supplying the service. Same way that Bureau de Change will charge you to change your pounds into dollars, he was taking a cut of the transactions. And so he started launching this thing. Obviously, because he was promoting it on Grams, it got a lot of attention. People heard about it a lot. But from there, he also did sort of, I don't know what you call it, client outreach, I suppose, to be the thing. He would go to these dark web marketplaces and say, look, your users want security, they want privacy. I've got this thing, Helix, that will hide their transactions. Why don't you embed it onto your site so that anybody using your site automatically uses Helix? So they integrated Helix into their payment systems. Your transaction would go through Helix. And of course, Larry Harmon would get a cut of this. And it turns out he wasn't particularly choosy about the kind of entities he dealt with. Anybody could use Helix. And he prided himself on the fact that they deleted the logs after the transaction went. So the idea was, even if the police get access to Helix, they won't be able to work out where your transaction was from because we delete all of our records. It was the ultimate, it's a white glove privacy service.
Wow.
Mad, isn't it?
Just genius. Yeah, it's like movie stuff this. You couldn't actually make it up. And look, he got caught, and it was quite a unique way in which he got caught.
Yes.
Google Glass photos were involved. Like, what happened there?
Yeah, so the police have been sniffing around these dark web marketplaces. And one of the big ones, the biggest one actually at the time, was called Alphabay, which combined personal data, hacking tools, passports for sale. I think a guitar lessons book was the most bizarre thing I saw for sale on Alpha. I don't know why people were selling it on Alphabay, but it sold everything. It was like, it was the market, the huge bazaar on the dark web. And it made millions. Alphabay was turning over millions and millions. And of course, Alphabay was one of the sites where Helix was integrated. The cops were sniffing after Alphabay, and it's always fascinating how these kind of sites get undone. I mean, Alphabay was on the dark web. You couldn't sort of find the servers. The people who ran it obviously did not give their names, any identifiers. But when you signed up for Alphabay, you got a greeting email saying, thank you for signing up. Hidden in the email was a name, an email address for a guy called Alexander Kazez. So when they searched for that name, they discovered this guy living in Thailand, started surveilling him, started realizing actually this was the guy behind Alphabay who'd inadvertently left his email address open, his name open in the emails that he sent to his customers. And there's this amazing operation where all of the big US three-letter agencies drop into Thailand, to Bangkok. They're working with Thai police. They need to get this guy, but they need to get him in a hot situation. They need to get him with his fingers on the keyboard, red-handed. And that's not easy because obviously if a police car drives past, he's going to close the laptop. So they need to tempt him away from the laptop. So they cooked up this stunt where an undercover Thai policewoman smashed into his front gate in a car and then created this huge argument. And he rushed down to sort of sort this out, leaving his laptop open. So the police all rushed in past him, got there, and he was logged in as administrator to Alphabet. It was just him. I mean, it was just a one-person band running this entire site. So that was, Alphabet went down. And remember, Alphabet was using the Helix mixer. So the cops managed to start accessing Helix mixer. They started managing to decrypt parts of it. It was still running Helix. It still worked, but you could start to de-anonymize it. The problem Helix had in the end was this. If you're going to use one of these mixers, in fact, any money laundering thing, if you've got a huge wad of criminal money coming in here, you put it into a mixer as $1 million. If immediately $1 million exits somewhere else, it doesn't take a genius, does it, to work out, hang on, that's Paddy's million there, and that's Paddy's. So wherever that million goes, we know it's still Paddy's. So what you want is for lots of money to be sloshing around in these mixers so that all the money can be mixed together. Lots of different people's money. So it's impossible to trace the money going in to the money going out. Helix had a problem with that because people would put in huge wadges of money and Helix didn't have enough money to mix it with. So when it exited, you could start to follow the trails and go, oh, hang on, that bit ties back to that bit. So they started tracing the transactions and they started tracing the 2.5% commission that Larry Harmon was getting. Because every time something went in, 2.5% of it would go off to this one address. It's like, well, that's got to be Larry's address. So they started tracing that address and started working out what that address had spent money on. That led them to a cryptocurrency account. That led them to a Gmail address. That leads them to a Gmail account. And they started analyzing what was in it. And what was in it was, of course, Larry Harmon's stuff, including, as you said, Google Glass images. Like Larry Harmon was obsessed with new technology. He actually owned some of these, the Google Glass things you put on. And they had a little camera that took pictures constantly. So as the cops uncover the Google account of Larry Harmon, they harvest all of his pictures. There's a picture of him wearing the Google glasses, and the Google glasses are pointing at his screen, which has got the Helix admin page open on it. So the cop's like, well, he's photographed himself logged into Helix as the administrator. That's pretty solid evidence. So that was when they went and raided Larry Harmon.
And his brother Gary, what happened there?
Yes, this is interesting. So at the time, Larry Harmon had moved on by this point. So he closed down Helix in, I think it was 2017 he closed down Helix. So Alphabet comes out about 2014. Alphabet's closed 2016, 2017. Suddenly Helix goes offline. Nobody kind of knows why, but it's just, well, I've had a good run. I'm going to close this service. What they didn't realize, of course, is Larry Harmon had probably seen what happened to Alphabet, worked out that the cops were on his trail and thought, I'm just going to burn house and get out of here. 2018, Larry Harmon pops up in Ohio, Dayton, Ohio. Akron, Ohio. And he's running a sort of crypto business. It's a legitimate business. Like he hires employees. They're doing proper trades, proper development stuff. And he's got an office full of workers who are working for him. He's obviously got a lot of money, and none of his employees could work out where the money came from. Like Larry's got a couple of Teslas parked out in the lot, and they're like, how does he afford the Teslas? But they just assumed, he's made his money in, crypto, legitimate. But then he sets himself up as a legit business person. So his employees are working for him, thinking that day to day, he's this benevolent boss who's got a load of cash and he's funding the business. Then the cops raid the business and everything gets taken out. All the servers get taken out. And suddenly it comes out, Larry Harmon is the guy behind Helix. His employees are quite stunned by all of this. He gets taken into court. And of course, as part of this, the cops seize all of his gadgets, his devices, including what's called a hardware wallet. So people might be used to setting up a Bitcoin wallet on the internet, which you can do. But you can also have your Bitcoin wallet on an actual hard drive, a physical thing, which when you think about it's probably safer, isn't it? You carry the thing around, you own it, it can't be hacked or whatever. So the cops seize the hard drive. They know that on that is 16 wallets and they contain, I think, more than 10 million. There's a huge amount of money on this thing. So they stick it in the evidence room and that's that. And then during the course of the investigation and, Larry Harmon's in custody and they're trying to get ready to prosecute him, they check these wallets, which of course you can do on the internet. Bitcoin wallets are all logged online on this blockchain, the publicly available ledger. So at any moment, you or I can look up a wallet address and go, it's got that much money in it and here's the transactions and so on. So the cops obviously every now and again check these wallets that are on the hard drive they've seized. One day, $5 million is missing. So where did that go then? Because it's in their evidence room. Like the hard drive is in there, and yet somehow somebody has managed to take 5 million off that hard drive. How does that work out? It turns out the hard drive had a sort of security function where if the hard drive ever fell into somebody else's hands, you could log in effectively remotely to the account using a special password and recreate the hard drive and take the money out. So the cop's like, oh, somebody must have had the password to that hard drive, dialed in remotely and recreated it and took the money out. I wonder who that could be. And that's when he started looking around the courtroom to see who was in court. Gary Harmon, Larry Harmon's brother, had been sitting there the whole time and of course had heard all the evidence, knew about this hard drive, knew it was there. The cops then start looking at Gary Harmon, and this is the bit where I just love, this is the best bit in the whole story, is Gary Harmon is unemployed at this point. He's living on benefits, but his social media account tells a bit of a different story. He's just gone out and bought an Audi A5. The check he paid for it with had the word Bitcoin written in the notes at the back. He hired some planes using Bitcoin. Suddenly Larry's got all of this money. Where's that come from? Larry was the guy who broke into the hard drive, pulled out the 5 million, and instead of being smart and got himself on a plane to somewhere, obscure, had gone on a massive spending spree. At the end of the day, Larry Harmon gets 4 years in prison. Gary still waiting to be sentenced last time I checked, but has been fined a huge amount of money. So both brothers ended up falling foul of the law.
Oh, wow. I mean, when I think of bank robbers, traditionally, they're people that pull up in a van and they raid the bank and come out with wads of cash. And obviously in this new tech world we live in, it's a very different approach. And often it happens without anyone even realizing until it's too late.
Yeah.
And I know in the Lazarus Heist, you've talked a lot about some of the different crimes. I mean, just for someone who isn't aware of some of these crimes and how they take place, could you give a couple of other examples of the way criminals are actually getting away with it?
Well, I mean, one of the most recent ones was February this year, which saw the largest theft of all time. Largest theft in history happened in February 2020. Perhaps a lot of your listeners and viewers don't know about this because it didn't really get reported. This is what frustrates me constantly about online crime for a start, and also crypto-related online crime especially. People think it's just happening somewhere else to somebody else, and they don't think it really matters, that it really exists or it's true. But in February this year, hackers believed to be working for the North Korean government broke into a crypto exchange and stole $1.5 billion worth of crypto. It took them less than 8 minutes to do that. That is not just the biggest hack of all time or the biggest crypto crime, it's the biggest theft of all time. In terms of one victim, one hit, one go, valued at the time of the theft. Just put this in context, you may have heard of the Great Train Robbery back in 1963. 2.6 million. Now, we were talking about 1.5 billion. Now, yes, over time, money increases in value. So the 2.6 million stolen in 1963, would now obviously be worth loads more. But so will the 1.5 billion that just got stolen in, 50, 60 years' time. That will be worth immeasurably more, almost certainly. So this is a vast, vast crime. And it happened to this cryptocurrency exchange. The way they got into the exchange was really interesting. They worked out the software that the exchange used to sign off their transactions. Software ironically called Safe. It's a company called Safe that makes it. They targeted the Safe software company. And the way they did that was they tricked one of the employees, one of the software developers, into downloading a share trading app onto their work laptop. So this app was a malicious app, and it gave the hackers access to that employee who was obviously working on this software. From then on, the hackers can effectively manipulate the software. So they changed it so that when this company, this crypto exchange, Bybit, when Bybit's employees loaded up the software to make transactions, what they saw on screen just looked like the normal software they always use. But in the background, the hackers were changing all of the details, effectively like rewiring somebody's, if I break into your online banking, you log into First Direct or Santander, you see the payment page, you go to make a payment. What I've done in the background is change the account it's going to. And it was as simple as that. A 1.5 billion transaction, instead of going over here, went over there, and it's gone. Absolutely amazing.
So Helix isn't the only sort of crypto mixer. Where are we now? Because some listeners might have heard about Tornado Cash, which the US authorities have been worried about for a while.
So these crypto mixers are really interesting because we've talked about this in the context of crime, and yes, they do get used for crime, but it's worth thinking about why these mixers get created and why people do support them and fund them and back them. There is an argument, and I think this will probably resonate with people, that as money becomes more digital, it becomes more traceable and trackable and potentially more controllable. So if I have cash, you can't control where I spend my cash, you can't track it, it's just gone. But if everything's digital, somebody somewhere can always track it. You see this debate there's an argument about what they call a central bank digital currency. So the idea in the future is that because everything's moving away from cash, eventually the government will just issue digital currency and we'll be spending digital currency. One of the big worries about that is how much control the government has over your money. The moment I get money, and frankly, if I withdraw it in cash, Keir Starmer cannot do anything about that. I can spend it wherever I like. If my money's issued digitally, could the government say, well, Geoff, you're spending too much money on cigarettes there. We're going to rein that in. Benefits money. Should benefit claimants be able to spend their money on alcohol and cigarettes? The government could say, well, no, claw it back. So there's a privacy thing about digital money. And what these mixers do is say, this is the solution. In the future, all money will be traceable, trackable, and controllable. You need a defense against that. That's a mixer. And people who've donated money to Ukraine, for example, have done it via mixers. I don't want the Russian government knowing I donated to the Ukrainian government, so I put my money through a mixer. You mentioned Tornado Cash there. That was exactly the argument for Tornado Cash. It was a mixer. It worked in the same way as Helix did, but Tornado Cash was available to everybody. It wasn't particularly a dark web thing. It's like, here's Tornado Cash. If you've got crypto and you want to send it somewhere, but you don't want a path that's traceable, put it through Tornado Cash. Unfortunately, another one of the North Korean hacks, this time a measly $625 million, peanuts compared to their current rates. That $625 million, a large chunk of it gets put into Tornado Cash. And Tornado Cash laundered that money. It's an automated system online. As soon as the money hit Tornado Cash, the numbers started whirring and it spat the money out to fresh wallet addresses. We still have no idea where that money went. It's $500 million of allegedly North Korean stolen money that's been laundered by Tornado Cash. The US government is prosecuting the founders of Tornado Cash. Now they're saying, look, you laundered money for North Korea. It's an offense. We're getting you for that. The crypto community is coming back and saying, well, A, we need privacy. Tornado Cash gives us privacy. So you're effectively prosecuting privacy. Second thing they're saying is, well, Tornado Cash, when you think about it, is just a piece of code that's on the internet. And it just lives on the internet. There's no, it's autonomous. It just sits on the internet and you can use it. If everybody who writes code is responsible for the consequences of the misuse of their code, whether it's 5 years down the line, whether they thought of it or not, you write code today, Paddy, or 5 years down the line, if somebody misuses it, we're going after you. What's your incentive to write code? So it's being seen as a crackdown on privacy by the US government, but also an attack on coding, on creative coding. So that Tornado Cash case, and actually one of the founders of it is up on trial in the US in July this year. That's a fascinating case. At the heart of it is this fascinating freedom of speech, privacy debate, but done through the medium of sort of cryptocurrency in North Korea. It's got everything. It's like the snow globe of stories for me. It's fascinating.
And privacy, I mean, it's a word that often gets branded around. Is there still privacy in the world? It feels like our lives are so public. Every app we touch, every search term we search for on Google or other well-known search engines are being logged somewhere. And so is there such a thing as privacy anymore?
Well, the first thing I'd say is you have an option about that. If we have ourselves given huge swathes of data over to entities that exist on our data and make money out of allowing advertisers to target us on that data. That is Facebook. That's why Meta is one of the biggest companies in the world. We've done that. We did that. And so when people do, moan and wring their hands about privacy and data, I say to them, well, just delete the stuff from your phone. However, there's a certain point at which you can't fight against it. So banks are, for example, closing branches. Your nearest bank branch will be a long way away because they say, well, you can use our online banking. When you hit their online banking, all of the little cookies on the site come up and it turns out you're being tracked by all these entities. So our ability to sort of push back against this stuff is diminishing. And the other thing about privacy is that the debate kind of seems to morph and change. So one of the things about a lot of the apps, the comms apps we use now, so WhatsApp is a classic example, but also iMessage, Telegram, Signal, all of these messaging apps, they're all what's called end-to-end encrypted. So if I send you a message, only you and I can read it. If it's via WhatsApp, Mark Zuckerberg sitting in the middle, he doesn't have a key he can unlock the messages for. It's only me and you. So these services, on the one hand, give us privacy. It's like, well, the actual communication, the message between me and you is private. And so these services are being offered. That's obviously caused a problem for governments, because if you and I swap data about a crime we're going to commit, the government can no longer go to Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook in the middle and Meta and say, could you unlock the communication for us? Because they'll say, well, no, we can't anymore. So on the one hand, it's causing problems for governments. But also, just because the communication, the actual content of our messages is encrypted, doesn't mean the fact that I communicated with you is encrypted as well. And in fact, that's what WhatsApp and Meta are making their money out of. They're mapping connections between people. So if the cops know that I'm a bank robber and they see that I message you and then an hour later you go and rob a bank, it's a fair likelihood you'll have been involved in the crime, right? So you can map out as much intelligence from these communication patterns as you can the actual data we're communicating, the contents of our communication.
Look, law enforcement and regulators, they are constantly trying to clamp down on this stuff. So in this particular case, what role did they have? What did they do? Did they get things right?
In terms of Helix, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. So the Helix case is a really fascinating one in that it shows the long arm of the law, to use that classic phrase. People have this idea of a sort of cat and mouse game with law enforcement, or whack-a-mole. Sometimes people use the analogy of, oh, something comes up, the police whack it, and then another thing comes up. I don't think that's quite a good analogy, a very good analogy. Partly because there's a complete misunderstanding, it seems to me, of how the game of whack-a-mole works. I mean, if you play whack-a-mole, you get paid for whacking the moles. You get points. So the more moles you whack, the more points you get. So if your argument is that whack-a-mole, as in the process of hitting things as they come up and then just keeping coming up, is bad, the game of whack-a-mole is literally the opposite example. But anyway, that's my certain personal soapbox. I think a better analogy is it's almost like waves happening. So a service will come up, a criminal enterprise will emerge and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the cops are aware of this. I mean, they've got pretty good intelligence and they can see these things coming through. And this gets to a point where the service is big enough that the cops think, right, we need to take that down. And Alpha Bay is the perfect example. Alpha Bay existed for years and it didn't get taken down. And people are saying, oh my God, the cops can't do anything about this, can they? This crime scourge of this site that they can't do anything about. Actually, in the background, they were doing a huge amount to try and take down Alpha Bay, researching the email address, finding Alexander Kazes, making connections with the Thai police, launching this investigation. And then what happens is that big criminal enterprise, like Alpha Bay, gets taken down, crashes down. But of course, in the background, the next one is just ready to go, and it comes up. And so it's not whack-a-mole, it's more of a sort of wave effect where something big comes up, the cops take it down, it crashes, and then it kind of comes back up again. And actually, the Alpha Bay example is a good one from that, because there were two marketplaces at that time. There's Alpha Bay and Hansa. Hansa was the second biggest. The cops knew, as soon as we shut down Alpha Bay, we know they're just going to all walk across to Hansa. It's like going across the other chicken shop across the other side of the street. So the Dutch police infiltrated Hansa and they had it ready. They effectively rebuilt the Hansa site so they controlled it. So they managed to get the guys who ran it, put them away, take over the site and run it. So when Alpha Bay closed down and the guy in Thailand gets arrested and the whole site gets shut down, there's a message saying, this has been seized, this site has been seized. So when you went to Alpha Bay, you saw this terrifying message of the cops are here, we're going to get you. A lot of people on the internet, I'm just going to go to Hansa now, dialed onto Hansa. And of course, what they didn't realize is they just walked straight into the Dutch law enforcement operation. So it was a fantastic two-punch sort of thing. And the idea of that was to avoid the situation where one criminal enterprise gets big and as soon as you crash it, the next one is already coming up. If the police have already got the next one, they're 2 waves ahead. And that Alpha Bay Hansa takedown really, really did make an impact on people's trust in dark web services. From then on, what you see is the criminality moving, I think, from dark web across to places like Telegram and Signal and those kind of things. There was a definite shift, which was happening anyway because these are apps you can have on your phone. They're not dark websites. But that 2-punch on Alpha Bay and Hansa, I think, had a real impact.
I mean, a lot of what you've just talked about, I think for the average layperson, we have no idea that this stuff goes on, and even some of the concepts, the terminology. I've got 2 young kids. My daughter's just turned 16. My son's 13. How important is it that we as parents start to educate our kids around the future of finance? Because, they don't even get taught how they should be using their finances, whether it's cash or online banking at the moment. It's really sort of surprising that we live in this world of information, yet the schooling system hasn't quite caught up with those sort of general life skills. But what's your view on that? What should we be doing more of as parents?
It's a good question, and I think there's a lot more room for sort of financial education at school. Talking to kids about these kind of things, and this idea that saving for the future and not spending all of your money each month, is an important thing. Because, look, frankly, the way things are going, the idea that when you retire at 65, you'll get a government pension, let alone a government pension that will give you any kind of reasonable income, as we live longer, that's going to get harder. The dynamics are against us. In an era when people live to the age of 70 and then drop dead because they've been working in the fields and the mines for ages, a government pension probably made sense. In an era when drugs and life expectancy will take us to 100 and above, but we've retired at 65, the economics don't stack up. We've got to sort of deal with this. That's what's coming down the track at us. So I think things like that can be better taught at schools. But also, thinking about cryptocurrency and going back to the start of this, things like Bitcoin and things like NFTs, those non-fungible tokens I talked of, those completely new and to us seemingly very radical ways of finance, they're increasingly getting adopted by younger folks. 10% of people in the UK now own a cryptocurrency or a crypto asset. Like, some of them might just own a thing. Some of them might have got given it as a Christmas present by their kids. I've heard of the kids giving like mum a Bitcoin or dad a Bitcoin for Christmas. But so increasingly people are owning these things. So we've got to deal with this. And the other thing to bear in mind is you might think, well, that seems a crazy thing to do. Why would somebody do it? Your kids are a perfect example. They would have been born just after the financial crash in 2008, right? Now 2025, yeah. We are used to a world, I was used to a world that I grew up in where there was a pretty solid interest rate and you could put your money in a bank and there'd be interest there and you'd earn interest. So a good thing to earn interest on your bank thing. Your kids got born into a world where the interest rates were just zero. If you take inflation into account, putting your money in a bank was the worst thing to do with it. For that generation of people, trying to find new places to put your money was actually a very sensible choice. And I think that's what stimulated that crypto adoption among people is, well, why would I put it in a bank, Dad? 0%, 0.1%. Look, Tether or ETH or whatever has just gone up. I can do that. My worry with that is it's unprotected. Your bank deposits are protected by the government. And also you're getting into speculation, you're getting into trading, you're getting into stuff, and you can lose all of your money on that. So I think somewhere between understanding these new worlds of finance and the appeal of them, but also stressing that, they are unprotected and you potentially could lose everything. That's where I think financial education probably has to go. But luckily I don't have kids, so I don't have any of these problems.
I'll be making sure my kids listen to this episode because that's great advice. And, in terms of our listeners, many of them work for tech companies. And what can those tech companies take away from this story? And what can regulators learn from some of the lessons that you found in terms of the Helix sort of saga?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about this kind of the lessons that organizations can learn from this. Obviously one of them is, if one of your employees gets arrested, don't try and steal their money out of their wallet while it's in the evidence room. But generally in terms of this, I think there was an exuberance around Larry Harmon. Looking back on his story and what he did, he invented a fantastic piece of technology. There are privacy reasons to have something like Helix. So he was onto a solid argument there, but it got gradually used for worse and worse and worse things. And in the end was used, as I say, for some of the worst offenses you can commit online. And Harmon was complicit in that. He knew what was going on. He could see enough of it. I'm sure he would say, well, I deleted the logs. I wasn't really, aware of any of this. I just put out a service. And this is an argument we hear quite a lot from the tech world is, well, we just put out the service. We just put out the platform. It's up to our users how they use it. Frankly, that argument's going to get harder and harder to run, I think. The idea that you just put out this piece of technology and people can kind of use it however. What we've seen in the case of Helix and Tornado Cash is the authorities will come after you. And your ability to say, well, I didn't know it was being used for crime, starts to ebb away. But also in the public mind, technologists are having an increasing influence over our world, arguably the biggest influence. The next big piece of tech around the corner could change all of our lives, could have a huge transformative effect. If it then gets used by some of the worst people in society, that's going to reflect badly on your company. The idea of the tech being the Wild West, where we're used to kind of gunslingers, wandering around, that's increasingly not the case. Tech's increasingly running our lives. It's the bedrock of our lives. And the idea that people who run that tech have this kind of laissez-faire attitude to the gunslingers in town, I'm not sure whether that's going to help you long term.
And we haven't mentioned the dreaded acronym that everybody's talking about at the moment, AI.
Oh, yes. Yes, I've heard of this.
I mean, when you throw AI into the mix of all of this kind of financial crime and all these sort of cryptocurrencies and all of this stuff, like what are, I guess, some of the things that we should be thinking about there? Has it changed the game in any way?
Well, it's interesting in that there's a classic split that goes on between sort of cybercrime and fraud, and these are sort of two separate crimes. And interestingly, people who deal with cybercrime, when you talk about fraud, it kind of hits them odd. It's like, well, that's not really sort of what we do. And when you talk to the fraud people about cybercrime, they go, well, that's the IT folks in the IT departments. There's this idea that these are kind of two quite separate worlds. So if you look at AI in classic sort of cybersecurity, cybercrime terms, yes, they're using it to sort of develop better phishing emails. They're using it to sort of audit code. They're kind of using AI the same way I imagine you do and that I do to just the stuff that we do, just make it a bit easier and quicker, basically. But it's not changing what we do. I mean, your job isn't a different job now to what it was before. It's just the job, but with AI assistance and so on. That's pretty much cybercrime. That's what's going on in cybercrime. And frankly, I mean, I'm in touch with some of these cybercrime gangs, the ransomware gangs, and I've asked them, are you using AI? And they've said, well, no, not really. Target reconnaissance, it's useful. They're kind of playing with it in the same way a lot of us are sort of playing with it. Oh, it's useful for this and so on. But it's not revolutionizing cybercrime because they don't need to. I mean, they can make $1.5 billion out of sending a phishing email to an employee. Like, why do I need AI? They did not need AI to take $1.5 billion out of Bybit. They did not need AI to take 600 million in the raid in 2022. You know, ransomware gangs had their first $1 billion year a couple of years ago. They did that without AI. So long as the taps are still on for the money, I think cybercrime is going to explore AI, but it's not going to revolutionize it. For defensive purposes, AI is massively important in cybersecurity. I mean, I think the running is with the defensive at the moment, and that's good. You know, if you're not looking at AI for cybersecurity defense, do it now because you can reap that dividend before the hackers catch on to this. That's where we are in terms of cybercrime. In terms of fraud, AI is an absolute game changer. Fraud is a crime of deception. That's at the heart. Every fraud involves a deception. That's at the heart of it. What does AI do very, very well? Makes us think something when it's not true. Makes us think the Pope was wearing a puffer jacket. Makes us think that some of our employees wrote us a fantastic email. It's deception. It's a deceptive technology. For a crime of deception, it's absolutely game changing. The big lesson for me, though, is if you're still thinking in terms of cybercrime over here and fraud over here, forget it. They are both the same thing. If you have people who deal with fraud and cybercrime and they're separate, get them together. They're dealing with the same thing. And my worry is the folks in the cybercrime world who think, oh, well, fraud's over there, it's for them to deal with. As the fraud scene gets overrun by AI, which it may well, it's going to roll over into cybercrime. So I think at the moment in cybercrime, we've got, you know, the walls are still high and the tide is not quite over. But as that tide on the fraud side gets bigger, it's going to wash over cybercrime. So I can kind of see that coming in the future. So now is the time, I think, to start looking at how AI can defend you, start looking at the AI stuff that's out there, start getting smart about how you apply those tools before we get that real sort of tsunami moment.
Yeah, it's kind of scary that there is going to be that tsunami moment at some point.
Possibly, yeah.
That's going to be probably another book, I guess, on that.
Will be. It'll have AI in the title, so it will sell, apparently.
There you go. And look, I'm starting my journey as an author. I've just literally started writing a book, and I always have so much respect for anybody that's written books, and I know you've written amazing stuff. So when you went through this journey of writing this particular book, were there any surprising moments for you that when you came across certain insights or as the plot twisted along the way, you found these twists and turns? What were some of those kind of exciting moments for you?
Probably the best one was, so previously I'd written the book, The Lazarus Heist, which is all about the North Korean hackers working on behalf, it's believed, of the North Korean government. One of the stories in that, and it is an amazing story, is how the North Koreans ended up working with an Instagram influencer called Hush Puppy, who on Instagram had 2.3 million followers. You know, his life was a succession of Ferraris and, you know, Gucci, and it was absolutely amazing. The guy really lived the lifestyle. Behind the scenes at night, he was laundering millions of dollars for the North Korean government. I mean, it's just a remarkable sort of double life story. And was eventually arrested in this amazing police sting in Dubai, where he was living at the Palazzo Versace Hotel, no less. So I wrote this story and I put it in Lazarus Heist, and I got an email, a message on LinkedIn from a Secret Service agent, a guy called Matt O'Neill, who said, "Oh, read the book, enjoyed the book. The Hush Puppy case you talked about, you attributed to the FBI. It was actually a Secret Service-led case." So I messaged back and said, "Oh, I'm really sorry about that, but I am writing a new book about money laundering, so perhaps we could speak and I'll put the story in the new book." So I spoke to Matt O'Neill and Christine Kelleran, who is his financial investigator in the team, and also a guy called Glenn Kessler. They were part of the same Secret Service team who basically started investigating Hush Puppy and the links and the money laundering and so on. And honestly, the story was absolutely astonishing. They end up getting on the trail of this guy. They do undercover stings. The crime gang catch them out. Then they go back in. In the end, what cracked the whole case open was one of the gang sent one photo of a credit card, and their fingerprint was visible on the corner of the credit card, and they managed to pull a fingerprint from the photo, and that's how they got it. Just so many twists and turns, to the point where in the interview, I was recording the interview, and I said, "Look, I'm interviewing you for this book," but halfway through the interview, I was like, at the end of this interview, they're going to say this is all off the record and I can't use it. There's just no way they're going to let me print all of this stuff. But absolutely astonishing story. And they said, "Yep, that's fine." I sent them the chapter and said, "Look, here it all is." And they said, "Yes, that's absolutely fine. A couple of tweaks here and there." But it really was an absolutely remarkable story, and one that I just did not expect to get. And also, I'd read everything I thought there was about Hush Puppy, and his colleague was called Big Boss. His accomplice was called Big Boss. Like, I'd read the indictments. I'd read all of the court documents. I'd read, really, really deeply into this. And I thought I knew the whole thing. But what you realize is the stuff that goes in the court documents and the press releases never includes the good stuff. All the twists and turns where it almost goes wrong and they almost screw it. They don't want to put that in the press release. But the cops who investigated like, "Oh, and then we almost lost him." That you get this whole story. So that was one of the really satisfying things, was really rounding out that story. Although the two people who know the rest of the story are Hush Puppy and Big Boss, who are both doing 10 years in Fort Dix prison in New Jersey. So hopefully, maybe when they get out, I'll do an interview. I've sent them copies of the book, but they won't reply to me. So they're the tantalizing, little lead that I haven't followed up, the loose end.
I've just got this picture in my mind of Hush Puppy in his cell, still wearing Versace gear, because I know he loves his Versace sort of label, doesn't he?
Or maybe he's taken in his prison uniform and just sort of tweaked it a little bit, put some Diamante on the edges.
Oh, brilliant. Well, Geoff, just remind us of the name of the book again, and when did it come out? Where can people buy the book?
The book is called Rinsed, as in washing machine rinsed. The paperback is actually out in July, so it's going to be cheaper if you want to wait till July. And you can get it on Amazon, but there's also a thing called bookshop.org. If you order through bookshop.org, it reroutes your order to your local bookstore. So you can support your local bookstore, but basically use Amazon. So if you want to use bookshop.org, it's there, but it's on all of the usual channels. And it's out now on ebook and audiobook and that kind of thing, if people prefer.
Oh, brilliant. Well, Geoff, it's been a remarkable sort of 40, 50 minutes that we've had this conversation. I've certainly become a lot wiser, and I just want to really thank you for taking time out and talking to us today.
Been a real pleasure. The Helix story, the Harmon story, I think is an absolute banger. I think it's fascinating. And because it emerged over a few months, it didn't really get the sort of traction or the attention. So I've been really pleased to talk about it. Thank you for having me on.